The Didache is an early Christian church manual, but its first concern is not how a new believer should explain Christianity. It is how that believer should live. Picture an adult Gentile at the threshold of a household church. This person is representative, not someone whose name or private story has survived. The problem, though, is real. Faith in Jesus has brought the convert into a new community. What must change tomorrow morning? There is no church building to enter. No centralized office can answer every local question. The community meets in a home, and the questions arrive in the most ordinary forms. What should happen to old loyalties? How should water be used for baptism? When should believers fast? What words should they pray? Who may share the sacred meal? What happens when a prophet asks for lodging, food, or money? And who can be trusted after the traveller leaves? The Didache moves through all of it: moral choices, water, fasting days, prayer, bread and cup, hospitality, fraud, bishops, and deacons. An ancient manual sounds as though it should offer abstract theology or a rigid constitution. This one follows faith into the body, the week, the household, and the table. It tries to form a recognizable Christian life before later institutions could carry that work. The journey begins with an image simple enough for any learner to remember. Two roads lie ahead. One leads toward life. The other leads toward death. Before the convert takes the first step, another question presses in. Who made this path? And what kind of church needed it? The document calls itself Teaching from the Lord through the 12 Apostles to the Nations. That title sounds like a signature. It is not. No surviving evidence lets us name the person who compiled the Didache. Most scholars treat the work as anonymous and layered. Older moral teaching sits beside instructions for baptism, meals, travelling ministers, and local officers. Those parts may not all have taken shape at the same moment. The strongest historical judgment places the manual's final form somewhere in the late 1st or early 2nd century. Many scholars favour Syria or the region around Antioch. Neither the year nor the city is settled. That uncertainty is real. It does not empty the document of value. The Didache can tell us directly what it asks communities to do. It is much less precise about who first assembled those instructions, where every layer began, or how widely each practice spread. The claim, then, is limited but substantial. We are not reading a transcript written by the 12 at one meeting. We are hearing traditions preserved by Christians who wanted their teaching to stand inside an apostolic inheritance and to reach the nations. A famous author recedes. The community comes into view. Somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, teachers faced converts who needed more than a title. They needed a path they could walk. The opening section gave them one, and it was already older and wider than this single manual. Related versions of the two ways appear in the letter of Barnabas and in a Latin work called the Doctrina Apostolorum. The image travelled because the problem travelled. Every convert still had to decide which way to go. The two ways begins as a contrast between life and death. It does not stay at the level of a symbol. The path enters speech, anger, sexuality, money, violence, magic, generosity, and worship. For a Gentile convert, these were not discussion topics. They touched the market, the household, family obligations, social ties, and religious customs embedded in civic life. Conversion could unsettle what had once felt normal. The way of life draws on the commands to love God and neighbour, then presses those commands into practiced restraint and mercy. The learner is warned against the conduct that produces murder, exploitation, falsehood, greed, and idolatry. The way of death is not a fantasy road marked by monsters. It is a life assembled from familiar harms. At first, that may sound like a moral list with Christian language attached. Chapter 6 reveals a harder question. How much of this inherited way could be placed upon Gentile believers? The language of burden and yoke recalls the world of Acts 15, where the Jerusalem gathering wrestled with Gentile belonging. Both Acts and the Didache take food associated with idols seriously. Both belong to an early Christian argument about holiness, table fellowship, and what could be required of people coming from the nations. They are not the same document. The Didache is not the lost letter from the Jerusalem Council, and it does not reproduce the decree word for word. The connection is safer and more revealing when it remains historical context. These communities inherited the same difficult problem. Paul's treatment of idol food in 1 Corinthians adds another voice. He can distinguish an ordinary piece of food from participation in pagan worship. The Didache gives its learners the safer communal boundary. Keep far away from food bound to idolatry. A convert might expect that becoming Christian meant adding a few new beliefs to an otherwise familiar life. The two ways expects something harder. It asks the learner to hand over ordinary decisions to a community's supervision. Conversion in this manual is not a label placed over the old life. It is a life being retrained. The teacher could point to the road. The learner still had to enter it. That entrance led to water. Didache chapter 7 turns from moral instruction to baptism. The movement is deliberate. The candidate has been taught before being washed. The text prefers baptism in living or flowing water, using the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That sounds like the beginning of one fixed ritual setting. The instructions then bend without breaking. If living water is unavailable, another kind of water may be used. Cold water is preferred, but warm water is permitted. If there is not enough water for immersion or a fuller washing, water may be poured 3 times over the head. The sequence preserves an ideal. It also recognizes conditions on the ground. A spring may not be nearby. A household may have only stored water. Climate, travel, illness, or simple scarcity could narrow the options. The response is not to make baptism casual. The candidate and the baptizer are to fast beforehand, and others may join them. Preparation reaches the body before water does. A rigid manual might have protected the rite through one inflexible method. The Didache protects the act by making faithful alternatives explicit. Conviction and adaptation stand together. The community does not treat water as meaningless. It also refuses to let imperfect conditions make obedience impossible. The catechumen crosses the threshold as a baptized member of the community. Baptism happens once. Formation must continue when the water has dried. The Didache next teaches the Church how to inhabit time. Didache chapters 8 through 10 move from water to the week, from the week to prayer, and from prayer to the table. The community is told not to keep the Monday and Thursday fast associated with a neighbouring religious rhythm. It will fast on Wednesday and Friday instead. This is sometimes narrated as simple rejection of Judaism. The document's own world is more complicated. Its ethics, prayers, first fruits language, and meal thanksgivings remain deeply shaped by Jewish inheritance. The changed fasting days show Christians marking a distinct communal rhythm, while still living close to the forms from which that rhythm grew. The difference matters. Boundary formation is not cultural amnesia. The Lord's Prayer gives the community repeated words, used 3 times each day. A convert does not have to invent a private spiritual life from nothing. Morning, midday, and evening can now be gathered into shared memory. Then the believers come to the table. The Didache preserves thanksgivings over a cup and over broken bread. The prayers remember God's gifts and gather the Church into unity. Access to this meal is guarded by baptism, and the instruction after the meal speaks of the participants having eaten their fill. Those details are clear. Their exact, later liturgical classification is not. Scholars debate whether chapters 9 and 10 describe a formal Eucharist, a larger communal meal often called an agape, or a setting in which categories familiar from later centuries had not yet separated neatly. The source gives us genuine early sacred meal evidence. It does not give us permission to force that meal into every feature of a later service. What we can say is enough. These Christians marked time together. They trained appetite through fasting. They repeated the same prayer. They gave thanks over cup and bread. They guarded a table that made belonging visible. What looked like a collection of ritual rules has become a shared life. The calendar forms memory. Hunger forms attention. Prayer forms speech. The table forms a people. That table creates a new pressure. Christian hospitality can welcome a stranger as a brother or sister. It can also expose a poor household to someone who knows how to sound holy. Sooner or later, a traveller appears at the door. The Didache's travelling apostles and prophets enter with real honour. They are not automatically treated as frauds. A prophet may speak with unusual freedom, and a genuine teacher deserves support. So the household opens its door. Food is shared. A place is found to sleep. Provision may be given for the next stage of the journey. In a movement joined by roads and household networks, that welcome helps teaching travel. Hospitality costs something. Bread given to a visitor cannot be eaten again. Money surrendered under spiritual pressure may be gone for good. And a false teacher can damage more than one family's stores. That person can damage the community's trust. The manual therefore watches conduct. A travelling apostle should not settle in indefinitely. An unnecessary stay stretching into a third day is treated as a warning sign. A demand for money for oneself is another. A Christian who intends to remain should work when able, rather than consume the community's resources without limit. Even dramatic spiritual speech is not allowed to end the inquiry. The Didache asks whether the claimant's behavior matches the way of the Lord. Authority is tested where it touches food, labor, money, and the treatment of others. Two extreme responses would have been easier. Trust charisma without question, or close the door to it entirely. The Didache chooses neither. It honors the possibility of a true prophet and builds defenses against an exploiter. Welcome remains a Christian duty. Discernment becomes part of that duty. Spiritual authority in this manual is not proved by the claim alone. Character becomes visible over time, especially when resources and status are involved. The rules reveal a strain that cannot be solved at the doorway. A church that continually receives travelers still needs people who know the household, serve it consistently, and remain when the road carries everyone else away. The Didache now turns to bishops and deacons. Bishops and deacons can sound like the arrival of the entire later hierarchy. In the Didache, the setting is smaller and less settled. These leaders are chosen locally. They must be worthy, truthful, free from the love of money, and ready to serve. The text connects their ministry with work also associated with prophets and teachers. That overlap matters. Traveling charisma has not vanished. Stable local office has not yet arranged itself into every structure familiar from later centuries. Both forms of authority can still be seen in the same frame. Organization is not defeating spiritual life. A vulnerable community needs dependable people so its life can continue. Teaching new converts, ordering prayer and meals, caring for resources, and recognizing whose conduct deserves trust. The center of authority begins to move closer to home. A prophet may arrive with a powerful word and leave the next morning. Bishops and deacons wake up among the same people again. Their credibility can be tested across weeks and seasons, not only during one impressive visit. This does not prove a fully developed later episcopal system. It shows a vulnerable community building continuity. Charismatic ministry remains honored, while local service becomes harder to avoid and easier to observe. The representative convert has now traveled the full formation path. The two ways retrained conduct. Baptism marked entry. Fasting and prayer reshaped time. The meal created belonging. Hospitality required discernment. Local leaders made endurance possible. The manual's anonymous compiler can disappear, and the practices can continue. If this document served the Church so concretely, why did it not become part of the New Testament? Eusebius knew a work called The Teachings of the Apostles in the 4th century, but he did not place it among the Church's accepted scriptures. Athanasius also distinguished the Didache from the Canon. He named it among works useful for people receiving Christian instruction. That combination matters. Outside the New Testament did not mean useless. The material continued to leave traces. A later church order collection, the Apostolic Constitutions, expanded and reworked much of it. Other witnesses preserved portions of its moral tradition. The Church did not carry the Didache forward in the same way it carried the Gospels or Paul's letters. Neither did every memory of it vanish. The only complete Greek text known today survives in Codex Hierosolymitanus, a manuscript copied in 1056 by a scribe named Leon. In 1873, Philotheos Bryennios found the codex in Constantinople. He published the Didache 10 years later. Modern scholars could now read the complete Greek work. They did not uncover a secret gospel or a suppressed Bible. They recovered a fuller witness to how some early Christians tried to form communities. The Didache is not valuable because it supplies one universal blueprint for every church. Its layers, its local pressures, and its unresolved questions prevent that. It is valuable because its instructions stay close to the ground. 2 roads: water when available, and an alternative when it is not. Days set apart for fasting. Words repeated in prayer. Bread and cup received with thanksgiving. A stranger welcomed, then tested. Leaders chosen because they will still be there tomorrow. The document explains how early Christians learned to live by showing faith repeated until it became communal practice. The distance between information and formation has never been measured only in years. It appears wherever belief reaches ordinary choices, shared time, hospitality, money, worship, and trust. The Didache's 2 roads, therefore, remain more than an ancient image. They preserve a question every Christian community must answer in the life it actually practices. What kind of people is this way forming?